Chapter 7, The Hit, December 1972. That night at TV room release, Bo and I came out of our cells on the third tier and headed down to the bottom tier. Each wing has a TV room on the first tier, allowing approximately 50 convicts to watch while sitting on the benches or standing around. Trash Man and his associates didn't come out. As we were coming down the stairs, I saw Chino standing off to the side. He gave me a nod, indicating that weapons were in place. As we got to the TV room, staff were doing pat-down searches before anyone was allowed in. As Bo and I entered, he went to the right and I circled around to the left, down the aisles with the benches between us. At the first bench, near the TV, we found the knives exactly where Chino had put them. We picked them up and went to the third row and sat down. Another NF member, Mac, was standing up in the left side corner reading a paper. From his vantage point at the rear of the TV room, he could see through the windows into the hallway. He was the point man and lookout. After a while, Trash Man and his two partners entered the TV room. They sat down 2 rows behind us. About an hour into the program, Bo said, "Let's do this." He got up and walked to the bench behind them. I got up and walked to the left aisle, circled back, and stopped at the end of the bench where Trash Man was sitting, facing him. In an instant, the 3 of them jumped up into a fighting stance. The associates leaped over the tables, over the benches, and attacked Bo. Trash Man lunged at me just as I was charging him. I stabbed him a bunch of times as fast as I could move. It seemed like forever that the scuffle went on. The 2 associates moved from Bo and headed towards Mac in the corner. Everything was happening in a blur, but time seemed to be standing still. Bo managed to get to his feet and he went after Trash Man, stabbing him and wrestling with him. Trash Man was still fighting back, holding his ground, but he was leaking bad. I ran over to the window as planned and tossed my knife out. Then I moved to the other side of the TV room to blend in with the crowd. Bo and Trash Man were still going at it, so I ran back to them to try to help Bo so he could get rid of his knife. Trash Man was starting to slow down, feeling the effects of the loss of blood and exhaustion. He pulled back, giving me time and opportunity to help Bo toss his knife out the window on the yard side. After the knives were disposed of, we moved back into the crowd to blend in with the rest of the inmates. Mac was lying down, semi-conscious from the beating he took from the 2 associates. The guards were alerted and started breaking windows with block guns, a combination device about 12 inches long, about the size of a flashlight that's used as a billy club and also fires tear gas. The windows in the TV room were about 5 feet up from the floor and run the length of the room. I crouched down under the windows and headed towards Mac. Glass was breaking all around. I grabbed him and dragged him back to where the crowd was watching the action, trying to blend in. I noticed a BGF, Black Gorilla family member named Junebug, sitting on the bench near the TV, taking in the real-life action entertainment. He brought it to my attention that my shirt was almost completely soaked in blood. Staff pounced on Trash Man and his associates as they were trying to flee the room. I had got to get rid of the shirt, but I didn't have a spare one, and I had to have one in order to get out of there. Junebug had 2 shirts on, a white t-shirt and his blue one. He tossed me the blue one as I tore the blood-stained shirt off and threw it to the side. The TV room was closed down for investigation and staff patted us down on the way out. We were ordered back to our cells, and when I got there, I washed up to get rid of any blood evidence. I was in there about 20 minutes and laid down on my bunk to recuperate. I thought I had gotten away with it. Then staff showed up for a more thorough examination. They looked me over head to toe and found a small amount of blood on the tattoo on my right wrist. I'd somehow missed it while washing up. It was a dead giveaway. The officer took a photograph of my wrist with blood spots on it, handcuffed me, and took me to the hole. I was on the second tier of K-Wing, second from the end. About 10 minutes later, Bo was escorted into the hole and shown his cell. Meanwhile, Mac had been taken to the hospital due to the beating he had taken from the 2 associates. He was later brought to the hole, and the 2 associates were brought in as well. They were housed on the 3rd tier. Around midnight, staff pulled Bo, me, and Mac out and escorted us downstairs to a room where we were read our rights. We were told that Trash Man had died from his injuries and all 3 of us were being charged with his murder. We all refused to talk about what had happened and were returned to our cells. The next day, I met my neighbor, Casper from Salinas. At one time, the cells had been double bunked, but for safety reasons, the top bunks were removed. That left small holes in the wall where the mounting bolts had been, where we could communicate with our neighbors using the holes. Casper introduced me to Sharky from Salinas. He was in the cell on the other side of me. Casper warned me to be careful when on the tier and never gave me the rundown. Casper warned me to be careful when on the tier and gave me the rundown on how the program worked. A guy named Ninny, who was housed mid-tier, kept a knife stashed for emergencies. Ninny. We were allowed out of our cells for 25 minutes a day for exercise, but there was a catch. The tier was full of mixed gang members from AB, BGF, MA, NF, and a bunch of other unknown gangs that might be trying to make a name for themselves. Only 4 cells were popped open at a time for exercise, and you never knew who was coming out or who might be a threat. Casper said that as soon as I was released from the cell, to run down to Ninny's cell and pick up the knife. That way, at least I would have a chance at survival in case anybody got stupid and went for me. Each tier in the hole has a double wide catwalk with a ceiling to floor fence extending down the middle to separate the staff from the convicts. This is to allow staff to monitor inside the cells without putting themselves in harm's way with convicts who might have weapons. 2 weeks later, at about 9 in the morning, the officer popped 4 cells open. One of the 4 was a known MA, and another held an NF member named Gary from San Diego. Gary was half white and half Mexican. During that time, it was just common to release opposing gang members. It happened all the time, just about every day. Gary was a 6-footer and 225 pounds of brawn. He had a definite advantage over his opponent. Taking no chances, when his cell door opened, Gary ran down to Ninny's cell, grabbed the knife, then waited in the middle of the tier facing the MA member to see what he was going to do. The MA headed for his homeboy's cell, who held a knife for the MA's. Without hesitation, he immediately lunged at Gary. But with Gary's longer arms and quick reactions, he drew first blood and continued to stab the MA guy until staff arrived and chased Gary off the tier with tear gas and their back guns. Gary headed to Ninny's cell and handed the knife off. Ninny flushed it down the toilet to lose the evidence. Tier staff ordered Gary to approach the barred gate to be handcuffed so they could enter the fenced-in area or the tier and render aid to the downed MA member. He complied. Gary had to have his eyes flushed out because of the tear gas irritation and was photographed with blood all over him. He was checked for injuries and 2 hours later returned to his cell in the hole. The MA member survived his wounds, was photographed, patched up, and placed in his cell on the opposite side of the tier. The administration knew about the gangs being at war, but didn't take any steps to prevent violence up to that point. The rest of the day, the tier was closed down for cleanup and stayed closed for 2 more days pending investigation of the incident. Ninny ran the tier I was on, even though he held no rank. He, along with other tier leaders, were gathered up and escorted to the committee room where the facility program administrator, the PA, was waiting. The tier leaders were informed by the PA that because of the violence between the gangs, there would be no program until moves were made to separate them by tier. After this announcement, there were no questions, comments, or complaints from anyone. When Ninny returned from the PA meeting, he sent kites to all the NF members, including me, because I was considered an NF sympathizer, as to what the plans were going to be for the next couple of days. The rest of the week, gang members were shifted to tiers of their own affiliation or with allies of their group. NF members that I knew came over from the other two tiers to ours on the second tier. There was Little Albert, who I knew from San Quentin, Snake from Bakers, also from San Jose. After everyone was moved, one side of K-Wing on the second tier was used for housing NF and BGF members. The first tier was for new arrivals and overflow from the second tier. The same thing was happening on the opposite side of the M's and ABs who were allies. There were still a few other convicts who had no affiliation with any gangs and who were always being watched with a suspicious eye from other members on their tier. Program was slowly being allowed back a little at a time in order to see how everybody was adjusting. No new problems. Everybody was doing okay. I was talking with Sharky one afternoon and he asked me why I hadn't joined the NF. I told him Larry had already asked me to be my sponsor when I was ready, and that I was when I got ready to join. In my own mind, I was beginning to see that I could be useful to the family, the Nuestra Familia. I had noticed that the tier I was on needed organization. One day, Nini and I got together and I explained everything to him as to why I hadn't joined the NF before this. I also told him that I needed to get word to Larry. The time had come. I was ready to commit my allegiance to the NF as a sworn member.